Hello everyone and welcome back to the NPC Dungeon. As always, I am your host and game master for the time being, and as a quick note, there may still be a slight echo. That's because I'm recording this episode just a few days after the last one, and as a result, I'm still moving. I'm recording now, it's posted later, because something came up in the moving process and it's going to end up taking a little bit longer than anticipated, so I thought it wise to go ahead and record now, so I don't end up having a post episode late or something like that. So anyway, as promised, I have an episode today about the player's perspective. It's going to be more geared toward keeping the game on track and running smoothly, and that's because, as I always like to say, the game is a group effort, and that means while a lot of the responsibility does fall on the GM, it's not all on them. So let's learn something. So this first one comes from a little misconception that I can't help but notice that crops up especially in newer players, and that misconception is that a respectful player talks less and does less things. And I get where this comes from. It's true in many other settings, but remember, D&D is a collaborative setting and a storytelling setting. Without the players, there is no story, and there is no game, and if there's no story and no game, there's no fun. It may be tempting to try to hang back out of respect for the DM, or the other players, or their story, or whatever, and there are definitely times to do this, but all that being said, it usually ends up just stagnating the story and being completely counterproductive. Now, in general, and I say this with a grain of salt, from a DM's perspective, I can honestly say, again in most cases, that I appreciate it when my players start doing unexpected things, getting into their characters, role-playing, exploring the world, doing stuff like that. Not only is this a good way of communicating to your DM and to your other players as well, that you're having fun and enjoying the game, but it also keeps it going and keeps it interesting. You see, when a DM sees their players not really engaging, they may start to think there's something wrong with the story, or the way they're running the session, or something like that, and they may start changing things to remedy that. They may end up modifying something that was perfectly fine, or just get discouraged, and that can definitely cause the story or the session to suffer a little bit. Now, a good DM will communicate anything before they make any major changes, but don't put all the responsibility on communication on them. If you're not having fun, communicate that too, but be sure to do it in a mature way and in private so it doesn't seem like you're trying to call out your GM or anything, because keep in mind, they put a lot of work into this so that you can have fun. And if you are having fun, show it by role-playing, show it by having crazy ideas, and show it by getting into the game. Don't be afraid to direct the story. If you have a good DM, they'll be expecting this, and they'll be ready to respond. Now, as I said, this does offer encouragement to the DM, but it also keeps the story moving forward. How does this keep the story moving forward, you may be thinking? Well, if the players are just passively following along, you only have one person in the entire group driving the story forward, and that's the DM. But if everyone is trying to figure out what's going on and seek out the bad guy, you have a cohesive group forging a narrative together. And as I always like to say, the story is not just the DM's. The story is everyone's. We're all trying to create this and write this together. But won't this slow the story down? Won't that cause the story to meander? Yeah, of course it will. But this is D&D, not a book. As much as I'm mentioning the story isn't the only focus. The main focus is the player's fun, and that doesn't matter as long as everyone's having fun. But obviously every group is different, so you need to know what works for you, your other players, your DM, your players if you are the DM, in general as well. Besides, and here's a little secret, a good GM will plan for this. Sometimes the group's going to meander. Sometimes you just need to take time to plan, or follow a random NPC because they have a funny hat. As long as you're not holding things back too much or getting in the way of anybody else's fun, you're fine. And again, and I know I keep saying this a lot, but that's going to be different for every group, so you need to know what works and what doesn't work for you and your group. The point is, there's no one way most encounters have to go. You, your GM, and your other players write this story together, so don't be afraid to make mistakes. Get in there and pester the goblins, try to tame an owlbear, and have your character develop a crush on an NPC. You never know where it might lead, but as I mentioned before, and as I accidentally let bleed into this last point a little bit, there are times not to do this, and there's a fine line that you don't cross. So what is it? So I say to get out there and roleplay and have fun and have crazy ideas, and in my opinion, that's solid advice, but there is a line that you don't cross, and this shouldn't be too hard to imagine given that our social world as human beings is complicated enough as it is. Now, I know I keep saying this is a game, we shouldn't take it too seriously, and what I'm saying here isn't taking it too seriously. Keep in mind, there are always little unwritten rules you follow no matter what we're playing. If you're playing chess, you don't flip the board. If you're playing Monopoly, you don't pick fights with other players. When you're playing D&D, there are still things you just do and don't do. I'm sure we all had at least one player who went out of their way to avoid the story and to sabotage everyone's plans, and usually I like to say that as DMs, it's ideal to write the story in such a way that whatever a player would naturally do and decide to do is exactly what you need them to do to weave the story together. But that isn't always easy, and sure, sometimes you're going to have players who go completely out of their way doing things their characters would never do just to stall the story. And because this episode is geared more toward players, for players who do that, I only have to say, why? Don't do that. You want to have fun, don't you? But more often than not, you're going to hear the excuse, it's what my player would do. However, this isn't a good reason or or even an excuse for a player to end up stalling the story. Here's what you do. If you're this player, most decent GMs are going to have at least some manner of hook to get you interested. It may not be a very strong one, but it'll be a hook nonetheless. If there isn't, find something in the story or quest offered to you and latch onto that. Understand that your DM works very hard on the story, and sometimes it's hard to work every little detail of your backstory or whatever into it. So if they leave something out, if they don't find a way to hook you and get you interested, that's going to happen. That's fine. You have to sometimes find your own reasons to adventure, and that's the thing, find a reason to adventure. After all, you are playing a role-playing game based around adventuring. The very least of your responsibilities is to find a reason to do so. If you're not doing even that bare minimum, you're not playing the game. What you're doing is you're sabotaging the game. So don't get mad at your GM for this. I know I probably shouldn't have to say this, but believe it or not, it does happen. The responsibility isn't all theirs. Take some on yourself. Again, you're all playing a game. And even if you can't for the life of you find a reason to be involved, that's fine. That happens. Think about it this way. Wherever stuff is happening in the world is where the fun is at. As a player, you want to have fun, don't you? So find a reason for your character to go there, even if it's not directly related to the story. This may sound like metagame reasoning, but again, it's really not. As long as you can find a reason for your character to want to be there, your character would want to be there, and it is still what your character would do. So the reasoning of, is what my character would do, not doing it, not going with the story, not being involved, doesn't really work here. As a quick example, let's imagine that your character just isn't the adventuring type and just wants to live a normal, quiet life. They still need to get sucked into the story somehow. I'm tempted to say, in that case, why are you even playing a character like that in the first place? But I can actually imagine that being really funny. A character who just wants peace and quiet, but instead keeps getting roped into adventure after adventure. And that's it. That's how you get involved. You get roped into the adventures. Obviously, you have to find reasons why and how that happens. And if that's the case, fine. Don't be afraid to talk to your DM before the campaign begins and let them know how you intend to play so they can plan accordingly, or at the very least, reach some kind of agreement with you about this character and how you're going to play them. And as a last note, I mentioned this a little bit before, but I'm going to go in a little bit more detail about it now, and I'll probably make a whole episode about this in the future. The quote-quote reason of it's what my character would do shouldn't be an excuse to sabotage the story. To be more specific, it shouldn't even come up. So if you have a suspicion that this is going to happen with your character, be proactive. Bring it up with your DM before the campaign so the two of you can work out a way to fit the story around your character in the same way that everyone else's is, so this doesn't even come up. Now, obviously, yes, you want to stay in character, you want to do things your character would do, but this whole it's what my character would do reasoning is all too often used as a way to just excuse really extreme actions, like slaughtering an entire village or something. Why? Just why? Don't jump to the first extreme that comes to mind. Why did you make a character that extreme in the first place? And honestly, if you feel like you have to say that's what your character would do, chances are it's not what your character would do. It's also often used to excuse things that you want to do, not your character. Practice a little bit of impulse control. And let's just say that's not the case, and you're doing things that you don't want to do, but you think your character would do, and that causes a big problem. Why is there that conflict? Why did you make a character like that in the first place? Think about this before you do it. But in these extreme cases that I mentioned a second ago, there's a very easy remedy. Just tone it down a little bit. Even if your character has the impulse to steal things, don't just steal everything that isn't nailed down. Instead, steal one thing every now and then make sure it's something that's important for the story or that might be useful to your character. And you can still communicate, like I said earlier, and talk to your DM and try to find ways for you to work this into the story. Even if there's a conflict where you just want to steal things because your DM is trying to run a good campaign where you save the world, I can think of many scenarios where a good heist mission, for example, would come into play, so that you can still do this and still work for the story and for everyone else and for your DM as well. It's all about teamwork. You have the most fun when you're working together as a cohesive group. Now, I am going to talk about things from the DM's perspective just for a little bit. You may still have a defiant player who refuses to do this and wants to just steal things and go against your plans and your campaign and the other players. In these scenarios, I just have the world react in a realistic way. If there's a threat of being arrested if you steal something that isn't nailed down, your players may think twice about doing these things. Now, as a quick word of warning, I want to say don't use these game things and mechanics to try to get back at your players. Only do it because it's the realistic thing that would happen and because it might deter some things. Don't do it because you're mad at them. Don't do it because you have problems with them. If that occurs, bring it up and talk to them like a mature human being. Don't use the game. But that's all I want to say about that, because I might make a whole episode about it in the future. For now, let it suffice to say that I don't like to invoke the whole social contract argument about D&D from a player's perspective unless I have to. See, some people say that the players have a responsibility to push the story forward, and I don't like to think about it that way. I do use the word responsibility, but I use it sparingly because, again, this is a game. Don't take it too seriously. Instead, I'd like to imagine that myself and the other players and the DM are there because we want to have fun, so roleplay, get into character and do what maximizes the fun that you and everyone else will have at the table. And that usually involves driving the story forward, even if involuntarily, at least at some level. And speaking of the players and the GM working together collaboratively to drive the story forward, here's another responsibility, there's that word again, that everyone at the table who is able to shares, and that's support the other players. Your GM has a lot to keep track of from their side of the table. They have to keep track of initiative order, tell a story, engage with the players, play the NPCs, remember so many details, and respond to whatever shenanigans that may occur over the table. And that's a lot to keep inside your noggin. So keeping track of, knowing, arbitrating, and interpreting the rules is just one more responsibility on top of all that. You can't expect any one person to be able to know and recall any rule at any given time. But remember, you're a group. So if you notice someone struggling a little bit, or if someone doesn't remember a rule, help out. If you know it, say it. If you have a book, look it up. And if you have a suggestion for a quick fix that will help save the time that looking it up will take, don't be afraid to say it. Not even your DM will think of everything. But supporting the other players doesn't just come down to the rules. Remember, you are not your characters. You are actual people sitting at an actual table, so treat each other like people. Celebrate one another's victories, say good job, and cooperate. And on the opposite end of this, if something doesn't go as planned, don't blame anyone, don't target anyone, and don't let character conflicts spill over into player conflicts. At the end of the day, we're all just grown adults pretending to be elves and goblins, fighting with swords and hammers, and chucking fireballs because it's fun, and it is fun. Don't take it so seriously, and you can still tell a beautiful story, just have fun. And this can also be applied to monitoring other players' toxic behaviors as well. I hate to admit it, but the DM can't see everything. Everyone at the table serves as a check and balance for everyone else at the table. If you notice one player cheating, being disruptive, being disrespectful, talking over other players, or just holding the story up, be mature about it and bring it up with them. And obviously when I say bring it up with them, I mean talk to them privately. Don't try to embarrass them by bringing it up in front of anybody else. That just causes more conflict. And don't try to use the game to get back at them. Again, we're all adults. Be mature and talk to them about it. Or if you're not comfortable doing that, feel free to talk to your DM. Don't feel like you're telling on them or singling them out because you're not. You're just trying to make sure that everyone's having fun. And that's the goal of the game, isn't it? Again, this goes back to what I said before. Don't take yourself too seriously. We're all just here to play a game and have fun. But in the spirit of playing the game and having fun, it's useful to know what's going on and to be active in actually playing the game and having fun. So how can we do that? Well, as I already said, it isn't the DM's job to remember everything for you. They have enough to keep track of as it is. Oftentimes, it's best to take notes about what's going on in the story, even if that just means writing down an NPC's name. These things meander, so it's important to remember things in case they come up later. Again, that doesn't work for every group, not a lot of things will, but what I'm about to say probably does. Don't rely on everyone else, and put all the work, even if that's just work involving remembering things, on them. Ideally, everyone will be engaged and actively trying to complete whatever task the story is placed in front of them in the best way they can, using whatever information that they may have at their disposal, and whatever skills they may have at their disposal as well. However, in order to know what is going on, you have to be paying attention and staying engaged. Now I get it. Some people struggle with that or become easily distracted, and that's fine. If that's you, find something else to keep your attention in moments when this happens. It's the rest of the group's responsibility and job to understand that. But I will add, just make sure that what you're doing isn't too disruptive. Personally, I'm okay with phones at the table as DM. As a DM, I'm okay with snacks. In my opinion, snacks are a necessity. After all, you'll be there for hours probably. And I'm even okay with the occasional side conversation. Remember, it's not a job, it's a game. But you know your group better than I do. You know the culture of the table you're playing at, and you know what is acceptable and you know what isn't. Sometimes it's just a matter of finding the right group. Although going back a little bit, as I said, I get it. This happens to me too. When it does, I look over my character, I review my notes, I plan what I want to do next, I try to do things related to the story. And I'll be honest, when all that doesn't work, I've even been known to play an occasional few moves of chess on my phone before. Just make sure, again, what you're doing isn't distracting for the other players, and make sure you do actually know what is going on. I can't tell you how many times I've, as a DM, had players on their phones, wandering around the room or doing something else, and then I'll ask them if they're paying attention. They'll say, yeah, I'm paying attention. And then the next things out of their mouths is, what's going on? Not only is this a little annoying, at least for me, but it also slows the game down and makes everyone else have to drop their doing to explain something this player would know if they were just paying attention. Like I said earlier, don't freeload off of the other players and don't put all the responsibility on them. We're all playing a game here together. Now, obviously, we all have to ask the occasional question, especially if you're a little newer, and that's fine. The other players have to understand that. But if you have to stop every time you turn around just to get a recap of what just happened, it's probably best to turn your attention back to the game. I mean, that's what you're there for after all, isn't it? And one last thing, and this one kind of goes back to one of the things I said earlier that I do when I start to get a little distracted or bored, and that's plan ahead. You see, the DM isn't the only one who has to plan. Be thinking of what you want to do even when you're not acting. Don't just sit there in a daze, and this is especially true in combat. And even, actually especially, when it's not your turn, you need to be planning. Now in my opinion, it's okay to take about a minute or so to think on your turn. The battlefield changes and what you plan to do may not even be a valid approach anymore when your turn comes around. But if you're sitting there on your turn for like 5 or 10 minutes, it's probably best to start planning a little bit. Otherwise, you really run the risk of just slowing the game down. And this really comes into play with spells. If you're a spellcaster, make sure you know how the spell you're going to cast works before you use it. Don't spend minutes of game time looking it up or reading the whole description out loud, because that doesn't help anyone. It's best to know these things ahead of time, so either write them down or have a picture of them. But if you do need to look something up, that's fine, it happens to all of us. Just try to do it discreetly and while all the attention isn't on you, so you don't end up putting the game back. So that's all I have for today. I have to admit, I expected this one to end up being kind of short, and it was a little short, but it ended up being quite a bit longer than I expected. I hope it was useful. I also tried to focus in a little bit on helping the game run smoothly from a player's perspective, but there are other things that I can explore too from a player's perspective, so definitely expect other episodes on similar topics in the future. As always, you can find this show pretty much wherever you get your podcasts. You can also go to the NPC Dungeon YouTube channel, where I also post these episodes if that's more convenient for you. I post new episodes on Fridays, so be sure to join me next Friday, where I tell the story of a moment of random improv and an NPC that my players immediately fell in love with. Until then, let's learn something.